Have you ever been in a situation where you have been wrong? What is usually your reaction? Especially in your job, you have this title. You earn that title for years. You're studying it for years. And then you take that exam, and then legally you have that title. And then someone will approach you and try to strip away that title from you. What will be your reaction? Will you protect that title or just let go of that title as easy as it is? So today, we're still in Acts chapter 21. We're gonna study from 17 to 36. We're gonna study the same issue as my example before. Paul doing this ministry, and then he is being lied, he's being accused, and here he is being beaten to death. And what will be your reaction when you are in that situation? How will you respond? How will you even glorify God even more through that situation? How will you view your ministry? How will you view yourself during that situation? So today we're gonna continue in 21. So we are here in the last ministry of Paul as a free man. In Ephesians 6:20, he described himself as ambassador in chains. So he's now in prison after this chapter. So we're gonna study more in epistle, the letters. You're gonna know that Paul is in prison, I, the prisoner of Christ. You'll notice that title and greeting. So verse 17, we're gonna continue. As Paul continued his journey, he wanted to go to Jerusalem. He wanted to take part of this feast. And he's really in a hurry. He wanted to join. He wanted to be with the brothers and sisters in Jerusalem. And on his way, he even go to this place and gather all these elders in Ephesus and remind them of this ministry, remind them of who God is. And now he continued his journey and he came to Jerusalem. And joining with him were Gentiles, remember that? And bringing with him is the wonderful gift, this offering, love offering from the Gentiles to these Jews. And this is a wonderful picture of love, because there's a big gap between the Gentiles and the Jews. They not go along with each other. Even the Jew described them as dogs. They're dirty. You will be defiled if you fellowship with them. And now the Gentile Christian extend that love towards these Jewish Christians. And this is really a wonderful picture of love between the church and how we are being unified through Christ. In verse 17, we had come to Jerusalem. The brothers, these are the Jewish Christians, received us how? Gladly. So there's this wonderful fellowship. They saw Paul with these Gentiles, and then Paul with this love offering, and they're really happy to see them, that God is also working through the life of the Gentiles. And in verse 18, on the following day, Paul went with us to James, and all the elders were present. So now they have this fellowship with the elders in Jerusalem with James. Only James, the apostle, is mentioned here. And I believe the other apostles were busy proclaiming the gospel through other areas. And it really excites me the more when I read this, because I wanted to know their ministry as well. What is the work of God through them? Because it is only this that is being documented. And imagine you will gather all those writings from other apostles. And it's really a blessing to know what is going on also to other places through them. So on the following day, the elders were gathered with James, and they have wonderful fellowship with Paul. And then here comes another thing that's happened. After greeting them, he related one by one the things that God has done. This is Paul narrating to them what happened to him, to his first missionary journey and to the third missionary journey, and how God uses life through the life of the Gentiles, how God used the life of the Gentiles, how the gospel is also not exclusive for the Jew, and it's also for the Gentiles. And Paul narrates everything that God has done. And what is this respond? That God has done among the Gentiles through His ministry. And when they heard it, they glorified God, and they said to him, "You see, brother, how many thousands are there among the Jews of those who have believed? They are all zealous of the law." So let's go back to the response. When they heard what Paul said to them, their response is they glorify God. And we stop here. This is a wonderful Christian trait of as a minister. As Paul relates to them what God has been doing, all they get, the message that they grasp is to glorify God. And it's very tempting, especially as we here doing this ministry for God. It's very tempting that we'll also put ourselves and we glorify ourselves as well. That's really a real temptation, because we want also the glory. We want also the recognition. We want also people to acknowledge us. And here Paul, there's no Paul. He acknowledged God, he glorified God, and the more God is glorified, and this is really a wonderful picture of humility through the life of Paul. Paul knows this, that it is not me. This ministry is not about me. This is about God. And we continue. The elders said to him, "You see, brother, how many thousands? This is not just thousand, but it's 10,000s. There are among the Jews of those who have believed. There are already lots of Jews, numbers of Jews who already believed in the message of the gospel. And there are zealous of the law." Who are these people? We're gonna study these people later on. "And they have been told about you," here comes a sad thing, "have been told about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake who? Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or walk according to their custom." So now, here's another lie that's been going on here in Jerusalem. Paul went there, and then all these elders informed Paul, "You know what, Paul, there's news, or there's a lie." You know, Satan is a master of lie. And there's lie. We are being told that, "Paul, you're not teaching anymore this custom, not to circumcise the children or work according to our custom, and to forsake Moses." And it's very ironic that they're accusing Paul of this, and then Paul wants to take part of this feast. They're accusing someone who's there. Supposedly they should accuse Paul who is not there. "Why are you not here? Why are you not with us?" And now they're accusing Paul of this funny accusation. So you remember what also Paul told Timothy, because it's very sad when ministers try to spread lies to other ministers, and Christians try to spread lies to other Christians. And this is what Paul reminds Timothy. In 1 Timothy 5:19, I'll read it to you. "Do not admit a charge against an elder except on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses." So that's how we handle lie, because lie is very tricky. Lie is very deceptive, and it will cause division. It will cause hurt. It will cause pain. And here, there's lie. And who told them? These are the zealous of the law. And we know that in Galatians, they were called Judaizers. They are there spreading this ceremony, this Passover, this Sabbath, as once you receive Christ, you need to also to conform to this religious duties. If you're a Gentiles, you need to follow these Jewish practices. And this is the Judaizers. And now they're accusing Paul of this as well. You remember what Paul did to Timothy? He circumcised Timothy, not the issue of salvation, but because it's a wonderful opportunity for Timothy to go into the synagogue and preach the gospel because he's a Jew. And now we see here a lie that Paul is not teaching circumcision, that Paul is not teaching them to walk according to our customs. And the elders were really worried because the credibility of the preacher is very crucial before you deliver the message. They wanted to discredit the credibility of Paul so that they can discredit the credibility of the gospel. And it's very, very ironic how they spread lies and how these lies bring into light instantly. And in verse 22, they are thinking, what then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you have come. Do therefore what we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. Take these men and purify yourself among with them and pay their expenses so that they may shave their heads. Thus all will know that there is nothing in what they have been told about you, but you yourself also live in the observance of the law. So now here there's elders. So they have this plan. So they command Paul. These elders command Paul. And now we're gonna see also an opportunity for temptation that these elders commanding Paul to do this. And then there's a temptation again to say, hey, you don't know who I am? I'm the apostle. You're just an elders. So Paul, it's a wonderful gift that these verses, all throughout to 36, we don't hear a word from Paul. There's no Paul from verse 17 to 36. He just go along with the flow. He understand what is going on. And in verse 22, they have this plan. The elders commanded Paul to do this vow. So what is this vow? This Nazirite vow. If you wanted to know what is all about Nazirite vow, you can go to Numbers 6, 19 to 20. It is to separate yourself from people and then you to God. So part of it is you restrain yourself from certain drink or the joy of life, and then you let your hair grow long. And then at the end of that purification, you need to shave your head and take your hair to the temple and offer he-lamb, she-lamb, and then meal offering, drink offering. So it's really an expensive kind of vow. So they wanted to let people see that Paul is not neglecting all this custom, this Jewish custom. So they have this plan. So Paul adhered to this. And there's a question why Paul just adhere to this law? Isn't a violation of we are not justified by law, right? We are justified through Christ. And what is Paul is showing here? I'll read to you 1 Corinthians 9. This is from Paul. 1 Corinthians 9, 19 to 23. Verse 20, to the Jews I became a Jew in order to win the Jews. To those under the law I became as under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside of the law. To the weak I became weak, and I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. So what is in the mind of Paul? Evangelism. He wanted them to know Christ. He wanted them to get really the real essence of why he keeps on doing things in his ministry. So let's go on with the law. What is the law? Before, during their time, when you say, I am a Jew, there's a connect between the Jew and Jewish law, the Torah, the Mosaic law. There's a connect. If you identify yourself as a Jew, instantly you follow to this Jewish customs, to this law. Right now, it's a different thing. You can be a Jew, but you can conform to a different kinds of practices. So before, historically, it's really connected. That's why when the gospel is presented to them, when they decided to follow Christ, they became apostate. Their right as a Jew been stripped out from them, their work, their family even, because their family is also afraid that the benefit that they get from the government will be stripped away from them as well. So it's really a big matter when you identify yourself as a Christian during their time. So it's not just today that I identify myself easily as a Christian, then I enjoy this benefit as a Christian, and then when troubles come, oh no, I'm not a Christian. So before, it's really a serious matter. It's a big thing. And when you want to know about Judaism to Christ, you will know that in Hebrews, we don't need to go there if you want to study, because the Jews don't understand this transition from Moses to Christ. And they're still being caught up with the religious activities. They've been still caught up with exclusivism. We are Jews, and this is our practices. You should follow this because you are a Jew, and follow all this custom because that's their identity. That's their mark as a Jew. And it's a sad thing that if you're a Jew, you are zealous of the law, you study the law, and you should get it, that the Messiah is Christ. But they don't get it. They don't get the substance of all these shadows that they have been doing for years. And it's not necessarily bad that they're doing this. The problem is they don't get the point. The issue here is not salvation. The issue here is they wanted to earn more of God's love, more of God's favor through this religious activity. And all this custom. And now Paul, go back to Paul, following this Nazarite vow, and in verse 25, let's continue. But as for the Gentiles who have believed, we have sent a letter. So they sent a letter to the Gentiles. Our judgment that they should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, from blood, and from what has been strangled, and from sexual immorality. So they inform these Gentiles that what are the things that are offensive to them. So it's very important that we should also keep in mind those people who are weak in faith. The purpose of Paul here is not to attain salvation. Is really sensitive to those people who are weak in faith, the legalists. Their faith is so bound to this custom, and once you will not adhere to it, there's a resistance that will happen. So they inform the Gentiles that this is what offend us, and also they don't want to push also all this Jewish tradition to the Gentiles. And in verse 26, then Paul took the men. The next day he purified himself along with them. So he undergo this Nazarite vow and went into the temple, giving notice when the days of purification will be fulfilled, and the offering presented for each one of them. So Paul adhered to this Nazarite vow. He undergo Nazarite vow, and in verse 27, when the 7 days were almost completed, so it's a 7 days period. So when the 7 days were almost completed, the Jews from Asia, this is Asia, not Asia today, China. The Asia is Asia Minor province during their time, and this Jews is from Ephesus. We know that in verse 29 because they mention Trophimus, the Ephesian. So the Jew from Asia seeing him in the temple stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him. So what happened here? So Paul undergo this Nazarite vow, and these Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the crowd. They confused the mob, and then they grabbed Paul, the whole crowd, and laid hands on him. So, what is going on here again? From wonderful fellowship to Paul adhering to this Nazarite vow, and then here, Paul is being grabbed by this confused mob, crying out, "Men of Israel, help! This is the man who is teaching everyone, everywhere." Watch out for their accusation against the people, first, the law, second, and this place, third. So before they're accusing Paul of not following all these customs, and Paul is there to take part of the feast, and that's really ironic. And now, note the setting. Paul is in the temple, and what they're accusing, that he is against the people. So Paul is with whom? These Jewish people. And they're accusing him is against all those people. And it's very ironic again. It doesn't make sense. You are surrounded with thousands of Jews, and then you're accused that you're against us. And why you're here in the first place. And then next accusation is the law. And this place, the temple. The law. Why is Paul against the law in the first place? He's there, adhering to this feast, wanting to take part of this feast. And against this place is inside the temple. If he's against of this place, he should be away from the temple, or outside of the temple. He don't want to go inside. And this is really a weak accusation for Paul. And look at what the Jews trying to do more against Paul. Moreover, he even brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place. Now they have plan B. During their time, when a Gentile will go or will pass from this gate, this is called a fence, a sword, it will equate death for the Gentiles. So the Gentiles were not allowed to go inside where the Jews are, and there's a big separation between the court of the Gentile to this the whole temple in general. So this kind of violation equates death, a crime that allowed instant execution, and that was bringing a Gentile into the inner courts. And now they have this plan. The only way to charge Paul with this kind of crime that will lead him to his death is this accusation. So look at their plan. And what are their accusation again? Their accusation is, moreover, he even brought Greeks, the Gentile, into the temple and has defiled this holy place. At what basis? Verse 29, for they had previously seen this Trophimus, the Ephesian, with him. Where did they saw him? In the city. The setting is there in temple, and the accusation is in the city. You see the irony there. In the city, and they supposed, the Greek for this is nemezo, supposing something that is not true. They assume that Paul had brought him into the temple. And now there's serious accusation against Paul. So let's go with the setup of the temple so that we can have a wonderful picture of what is going on. So the temple has this rectangular section, and then the center is the holiest of holy. The high priest is only allowed to go inside. So the first court is the court of the Gentiles. So they are outside. And then there's a fence called sword. So it's a wide fence to make sure that no Gentile will step in to what they call a clean place. Because they consider Gentiles as unclean. So that they will not defile, that's what they said, this holy place. And then after that fence, there's this beautiful gate. And then next rectangular place is the court of the woman. And then another gate, Nicanor gate, and then the court of Israel, where the Jewish men gather there. So they are now accusing Paul that is dragging Trophimus from the place of the Gentile down up to this court of Israel. And it's very funny accusation, because how can you accuse a Jew violating a Jewish law that in the first place he is a Jew. He is also considered clean. He is not violating any law that restrict him of going there. So supposedly they should accuse Trophimus. Why you go here in the courts of Israel when you're not allowed to go here? And it's it's a serious violation. And there's this archaeological evidence, there's a signage that they saw to make sure that no Gentiles would go to the court of a woman or of the Israel. So the signage states that no man of another nation is to enter within the fence and enclosure round the temple, and whoever is caught will have himself to blame that his death ensues. So it will equate to death when you go inside. And there's also Levites who are guarding the gates. They make sure that no Gentiles will go inside. And the accusation here is very ironic. The accusation is really baseless, because it's not the people who will determine that Paul is drugging. It should be the gatekeepers. Paul is bringing all these Gentiles. They're defiling our holy place, and these people try to get the justice through their hands. And in verse 30, then all the city was stirred up. So there's this commotion because of this lie. And that's the nature of lie. It will cause division. It will cause confusion. And it's very important we will bring that lie to light. And the city was stirred up, and the people ran together. They seized Paul, dragged him out of the temple, and at once the gates were shut. Notice this passive tense, that the gates were shut. And we know that in Luke 21:6, I will read it to you. This is Jesus foretells the destruction of the temple, because during the death of Christ, you remember that the veil is being turned from top to bottom, and that's not just a single piece of veil. And some historians said that its thickness is like the size of our palm, so it's really thick. So God tore that veil, signifying that His presence is not there anymore. And in verse 21:6, I'll read it to you. As for these things that you see, the days will come when there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. So there's a prophecy that this temple will be destroyed. And now the new temple in Acts before 17:24, the Lord of heaven and earth does not live in temples made by hand. So He now live inside of us. So the Jews don't get it. They are very, very caught up with religiosity. They're busy checking this checklist that I will do this ceremony, I will do this sacrifice, I will do this meal offering, water offering, all this kind of 613 law of Moses. And we know that we violate a single law, we violate everything. And let's continue. In verse 31, as they were seeking to kill him, word came to the tribune. So there's this Antonia fortress, the four corners of the temple. There were guards there, ensuring that the peace and order within the temple is okay. So they're watching, because there are lots of people going to this place to take part of this feast. So when there's this chaos, obviously they will see it, what is really going on. So in verse 32, he sat at once, took soldiers and centurions. They're bringing the best of their soldiers. And imagine this is just Paul. Took the soldiers and centurions as if Paul is a number one criminal here, and ran down to them. And when they saw the tribune and the soldier, they stopped beating Paul. In verse 33, when the tribune came up and arrested him and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains, he inquired who he was and what he has done. So they asked, who is this man? What is his violation? And then what's the response of the crowd? Some of the crowd were shouting one thing and some another. This is a familiar pattern even during Jesus' times, right? That the one crowd say one thing and the other crowd says another thing. And the riot at Ephesus is still the same. This is really the characteristic of the mob. The brainless mob. They just go there and bandwagoning what is going on, and then you ask them what is really going on. They don't have any idea. We just go along with the flow. So now here's confusion. Another group of Jews says one thing, another group says another thing. And in verse 34, and as he could not learn the facts, these are the soldiers, because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks. So they bring Paul to the barracks to be investigated, who he is and what is his violation. And when he came to the steps, he was actually carried by the soldier because of the violence of the crowd. The crowd is really there to kill Paul. They're really into it. They're really determined to kill Paul. And Paul knew this, right? And there's even a prophecy in Acts 21:11. Remember that prophecy about the belt? I'll read it to you in Luke 21, in Acts 21. Acts 21:11. Here's the prophecy from Agabus. So this is Agabus saying, and coming to us, he took Paul's belt and bound his own feet and hands and said, thus says the Holy Spirit, this is how the Jews at Jerusalem will bind the man who owns this belt and deliver him into the hands of the Gentiles. And this is now the fulfillment of what Agabus is saying. So, what is the response of Paul? We don't hear anything yet. In verse 36, for the mob of the people followed, cry out, away with him. And this is also a familiar phrase during the time of Christ. They really wanted to kill him, in other words. So from verse 17 to 36, we don't hear anything from Paul. We don't hear yet what Paul wants to say, how Paul will defend himself. And I'm studying this 17 to 36. I know it's really a long verse, and I wanted really to us to grasp how Paul respond to this hurtful situation. You're being lied, you're being accused, and now in verse 27 to 36, how Paul submit to the will of God, even to this near-death experience. He knows that all that's happened to him is according the will of God, the sovereignty of God. God planned everything. There's no accident. And Paul submits to that will of God. And Paul knows that it's also for the glory of God. And what can we learn from here as we do ministry, as we continue with reaching out the lost, as we continue with encouraging one another? Humility is really a wonderful trait for a Christian, all of us, putting aside our self-interest, putting aside the I word when we do ministry, because it's really tempting to go also with that glory and not give God all the glory that He deserves, because the temptation is there. And it's a wonderful reminder for us today as we continue with doing this ministry. Our Bible study is growing And we thank God for that. And the temptation is there as well, to be proud. And another also wonderful thing that we can learn from here is his submission to the elders. Paul submit to the elders. When the elders said, "Therefore do this," we don't hear a word from Paul. Paul gladly and rejoices submit to the plan of these elders because he knows that their plan is also for the glory of God. And we know that in the next verses. And there's wisdom, godly wisdom in there to their plan. And submission to the elders is also a real temptation as we grow in one another, as we handle conflict, as we glorify God the more. Because we wanted, for my example, a while ago, we wanted to push ourselves forward, our credential. Don't you know who I am? I am a doctor. I am an engineer. I have this wonderful credential, and you're saying to me about these things? And who are you? And Paul don't forward himself. He submit to the authority of the elders. And lastly, he submit to the will of God. And this is easy being said than done. When you are in that situation, when you're being accused, when you are beaten to death, when you have this near-death experience, and you still need to submit to the will of God and have this heart that this is according to the will of God, and it's not easy. And we thank God that the temple is not already physical, but the temple is in us. The Holy Spirit will equip us. The Holy Spirit will dare to guide us. And the Holy Spirit will remind us through His Word. And this is the thing that I want us to see in these verses. A wonderful character trait of a Christian, that is humility. And let us pray.